All right, guys, welcome back. I hope you're all having a great day. And today I'm going to try something a little bit different and we'll see how it goes. Maybe it'll become something I do more often, but basically, as the title states, this is going to be a let's talk type of format. And I'm just going to talk about different kinds of topics, but still pertaining to franchise mode or Madden in general. And today that topic's going to end up being expectations. If you follow me on Twitter, then you might know where this is coming from, but I figured it was something worth talking about, especially since we're right around the corner from Madden 19 dropping, and we all have different expectations, and ultimately those expectations are going to heavily dictate how we feel about the game and how we feel about franchise mode. But if you don't follow me on Twitter, a while back I posted a question where I asked, at what point in time did CFM or franchise requests and expectations start to become unreasonable or unrealistic? It was a pretty loaded question, and I didn't exactly word it in the best way, and I wasn't really expecting any kind of surefire answer, but basically what I was looking to identify was the point in time where the thought or that sort of stigma that the franchise community was expecting or demanding too much started to become more prominent. And the reason why I asked that question is because one of the things you see every year in regards to certain things or certain features that tend to skew more towards that in-depth hardcore CFM type nature is that they aren't or won't ever likely be in the game because it boxes out or it doesn't appeal to the casual. Then another side to that is that there's the expectations when it comes to the amount that can or can't be done within a given year or a given dev cycle, which is kind of another thing entirely. But back to the question itself, and more so the first part, I think that's a lot easier to answer or at least identify where that disconnect might have began. You look back at Madden 12 and the kind of features and just the overall nature and direction of franchise mode at that time and how it was starting to slant more towards that authentic simulation style. And then when Madden 13 came in, it brought CFM or CCM at the time, and with that, basically a completely opposite direction. A lot of those features and authenticity ended up being sacrificed with the transition to the more gamey, arcadey RPG approach. And then more recently, to go along with that, we've also seen a huge amount of importance placed on accessibility and bringing in the casual user. And what's really happened with that transition is that it's completely shifted who the core player base of the mode is now by not only bringing in more of those casual players, but also by pushing out some of those players that want tons of authenticity and depth within their franchise mode. And then at the same time, a lot of those people have also remained. And to get to the expectations part of this, which is the entire point, those are two groups that are going to have absolutely wildly different expectations when it comes to what they're expecting the mode to be and what they want out of the mode. For the casual user, you don't really have to do much at all because more than likely they're going to be happy either way. That's part of being a casual user. And then to the other side of that, you're going to have people like me where it's never enough, and no matter what you do, you're always looking to push the mode forward and make it better and better each year despite how good it might be. And whether it was intended or not, with that transition and the importance they put on the casual user, it almost made those requests or expectations of what a lot of people wanted and have wanted franchise, or in this case CFM, to be suddenly inherently become unrealistic or unreasonable. And just to clarify there, I'm not saying that it's ever unrealistic or unreasonable to ask for or want anything to be in CFM or franchise mode. I can't sit here and say something like that when I'm asking for things like compensatory picks. But what I'm saying is that it basically became unrealistic or unreasonable to expect those kind of things to ever make it in because of the nature and the direction of the mode. And what I mean by that is if you go back to Madden 12 and you had a top 5 wish list that consisted of things like restricted free agency, fifth-year options, and something like compensatory picks, it wasn't a crazy thought to think that those things could make it into next year's game, because at the time they were adding things like obscured ratings during the preseason, more robust contract options, and expanded rosters. But when you look at things now and the course of CFM over the last several years, then you come back to that crux of, sure, it's not unreasonable to ask for those kind of things, but at the same time, if you're expecting those kind of things to actually make it in the game at a point in time where the main features we're getting are things like Play Now Live and drive goals, suddenly asking for those kind of things becomes a crazy thought, because not only do those things not appeal to the casual, but it's also not something that's sexy that can be sold as a back of the box feature. And I'm not trying to rationalize it because I hate it, and I haven't liked it since the beginning because of how much more difficult it makes getting the type of things that I want to see in franchise mode into the game. And a lot of my frustration comes from situations with those things that I mentioned. I expect those things to be in the game because, in my opinion, they're on the same level as something like free agency or trades and those type of franchise elements. And in my opinion, there shouldn't ever really need to be any kind of discussion of whether or not it can appeal to a casual user or whether or not it's a sellable feature or not, because those things aren't features to me. They're foundational elements that really should have been in there from the beginning, and that's something that I'm always going to remain stubborn as hell on. And another thing is that when I look at things just for me personally, my expectations haven't really changed over the years. I still want the same things I wanted 5 years ago. I still want the same things I really wanted 10 years ago. 5 years from now, I'm still going to want franchise mode to be something along the lines of what I outlined in that CFM post. And with that being said, it's felt like ever since that transition from Madden 12 into CFM, it does feel like wanting a lot of those things really has become unrealistic just because of the hurdles you have to jump through and the concessions that have to be made to not only get those things on the radar, but then also fit them into that casual spectrum. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on some of that. But one of the main reasons I asked that question was to get other people's perspective, because I obviously know how I felt, but I wanted to see if it was just me and if people felt differently. And more than a few replies to that tweet mentioned MUT, and I don't really want to open that can of worms and go down that road, but it's always an interesting argument to me simply because that timeline where that shift or decline in franchise mode started to occur and the rise in popularity of MUT happened around the same time. So it's been one of those things that's always been tied together. That being said, I'd like to believe that that's not the case, but the reality is that it's far outside of my scope and knowledge. Call me overly optimistic, but for me personally, I don't think that was necessarily the case, at least early on. I think CFM initially had plans or hopes of getting back to that Madden 12 or Madden 06 type of franchise mode and being something with a lot of depth, albeit in a very different light with those more gamey elements. But I think what happened was it was such a drastic change and so many things were taken away and needed to be brought back that it turned a ton of people off to the mode during that period, and a lot of people stopped playing it. Early on though, we had schemes and we had player types in there, and then the news feed and the Twitter feed were good things, but the problem was they were never built on. And then at some point, whether it be Madden 25 or Madden 15, that huge importance on the casual came in, and that was probably, now that I think about it, around Madden 25 when the transition to the One and the PS4 was taking place, and maybe that's when they realized how much of a moneymaker MUT was or could be for that audience. I don't know. Like I said, that's a bit out of my scope, and I'm not really that interested in opening that MUT versus CFM can of worms. But one last thing I kind of wanted to hit on here as well, which kind of goes back to what I was just talking about before and just the overall spectrum of expectations and where they change. One thing that I think is definitely a point of contention for me, and I feel like there's a lot of people that might feel the same way, is essentially, like I said before, the thought that I never changed my expectations. Like I said, I still want the same things I wanted 5 years ago, and at one point in time, those expectations weren't something that would be considered far-fetched, but now the rationality of those expectations has changed because of something that was completely out of my control. And an example I'm going to use is, let's say you ask somebody to paint a picture of a person and the result ends up being the equivalent to the Mona Lisa. Then you ask them to paint 10 more pictures of people and they all end up being stick figures. Maybe each one gets better and is more proportionate or has better facial features or whatever. That's besides the point. The point is that the more that happens and the longer that goes on, the expectation that you're going to get that original Mona Lisa-esque picture being created becomes an unreasonable expectation, even though it's something that's already been done and you know is capable from that person. And from there, you're basically either forced to adapt your expectations or keep being disappointed by dude's stick figure masterpieces. And adapting those expectations is something that's a huge problem for me personally, and a concession that honestly I'm not really willing to make when it comes to Madden and franchise mode, which is why it kills me when it comes to articles about franchise mode and I read things like the mere fact that they've added any improvements at all is to be appreciated. Like, come on, man. That's such a horrible attitude to have. And I feel like over the last several years, that type of complacency and satisfaction with just getting anything has become a lot more prominent. And that's part of the reason why I do what I do. And that was the reasoning behind the entire CFM post. I want people to demand more, and I want the expectations to be that Mona Lisa-esque franchise mode instead of settling and being okay with just getting 1 or 2 features and a bunch of smaller things each year. Now, obviously, there's a huge difference when it comes to that and wanting that from a big picture standpoint versus wanting things to happen overnight or in one cycle, which is always going to be a completely unrealistic expectation. And with that comes its own set of problems in that if you guys have ever heard the quote, expectations are resentments waiting to happen, that's something I firmly believe in, and I think that's how EA has kind of gotten themselves into this predicament where franchise mode gets memed every time they tweet or talk about it, because over the years you hear things like it was completely overhauled, or they talk this huge game and then people think that all of these things that they've wanted for years are coming, which sets them up for disappointment. And then when that obviously doesn't happen, and then on top of that, what does end up coming doesn't hit the mark, things start to get volatile. I don't think you can ever ask for too much, and I hope people don't ever stop asking for all of those things that they want to see in franchise mode, because I feel like when that happens, complacency sets in, and things like last year happen where the higher ups think it's okay for franchise to essentially take a year off, and no mode or no community should have to deal with something like that. I think that's going to do it though, a little bit different than usual, but if you guys enjoyed this, let me know and I'll do this more often. I have a few more topics already in mind right now, but beyond that, it's up to you guys if you want me to do more stuff like this. But let me know some of your thoughts on anything expectations related and how yours have changed over the years, or how you think overall expectations might have changed as well. But like I said, that's going to do it. I appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to listen to me talk about Madden. I hope you guys have a great day, and as always, thanks for watching.